What happens when a pop superstar known for saying exactly what's on her mind sits across from a panel that's used to steering the conversation and doesn't appreciate being nudged into a box? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. So the show opens like it always does, bright lights, the familiar theme music fading out as the applause rolls across the studio. Whoopi leans forward first, smiling the way she does when she's trying to keep things light but controlled. Joy is already glancing at her cards. Sunny has that attentive, serious expression, and Sarah looks relaxed, hands folded, ready to jump in if needed. Doja Cat sits on the couch, legs crossed, posture casual but alert, dressed in something bold but understated, her hair pulled back just enough to keep her face clear. She's smiling, but it's the kind of smile that feels measured. Whoopi welcomes her, thanks her for being there, mentions the new music, the tour buzz, the fact that Doja's always full of surprises. Doja nods, laughs lightly, thanks them for having her. The audience claps again, a few cheers sprinkled in. Everything feels normal, easy. Joy jumps in quickly, as she often does, saying how she's been watching Doja's career for a while now, how she finds her fascinating, unpredictable. Doja smiles and says she appreciates that unpredictability keeps things interesting for her. Sarah adds something about how fans really connect with Doja's honesty, how she doesn't seem afraid to push back against expectations. Doja agrees, says she's always just tried to be herself, even when that rubs people the wrong way. Sunny asks about the pressure of fame, about constantly being discussed online, dissected. Doja's tone shifts slightly, more thoughtful now. She talks about how it can be overwhelming, how sometimes people think they know you because they see clips or tweets, but they don't see the whole picture. The audience murmurs in agreement. Then Joy leans forward, tilts her head, and the energy in the room changes just a little. It's subtle, but it's there. Joy says something like, but a lot of people feel like you bring some of that on yourself. I mean, you post things, you say things, and then when people react, it's like, well, what did you expect? There's a beat. Doja blinks, still smiling, but her jaw tightens just a touch. Whoopi glances over at Joy, then back at Doja, sensing the shift. The audience lets out a small, nervous laugh. Doja responds calmly at first. She says she understands that when you're public, people will react, but that doesn't mean they get to project whatever story they want onto her. She says there's a difference between expression and invitation. Her voice is steady, controlled. Joy nods, but doesn't really back off. She adds, sure, but when you're provocative, people are going to label you. That's just how it works. It's not always fair, but it's reality. Doja's smile fades now. Not dramatically, just enough that it's noticeable. She shifts slightly on the couch, uncrosses and recrosses her legs. She takes a breath before answering. She says she gets that reality exists, but she doesn't agree that people should accept being mislabeled as the cost of being creative. She says that mindset keeps artists boxed in, especially women. Sunny jumps in, trying to balance things, saying she thinks Doja has a point, that women in entertainment are often criticized for the same behavior that's praised in men. The audience applauds lightly. Joy interjects again, saying, I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying if you poke the bear. That's when Doja lifts her hand slightly, not aggressively, but clearly signaling she wants to stop that thought right there. Her tone sharpens, still calm but unmistakably firm. She says, don't do that. The room goes quiet for half a second. Not dead silent, but that sharp, collective intake of breath from the audience. Whoopi's eyebrows go up. Sarah leans back a little. Sunny looks from Doja to Joy. Joy looks surprised, then a bit defensive. She asks, don't do what? Doja doesn't raise her voice. If anything, she lowers it. She says, don't frame it like I'm asking for disrespect because I'm expressive. That's not fair, and it's not accurate. Her words are precise now, measured. She's clearly choosing them carefully. Whoopi steps in gently, trying to keep the tone from tipping too far. She says, okay, let's slow it down. I think what Joy's trying to say is. But Doja shakes her head slightly, not rudely, just firmly. She says she understands what Joy is trying to say, and that's exactly why she's pushing back. She explains that this kind of language is why so many artists feel unheard. The audience starts clapping, some louder than others. Joy exhales, leans back in her chair, and says she didn't mean it personally, that she's just talking about public perception. Doja responds quickly, saying public perception doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by conversations like this one. There's another pause. You can almost feel the producers behind the scenes holding their breath. Sarah jumps in, saying she thinks this is actually an important conversation, that it's good to talk about how narratives are built. Sunny nods, adding that media framing matters, especially on a show like this. Joy looks a little flustered now, but she presses on, saying she's been doing this a long time and that sometimes younger celebrities don't realize how the game works. That comment gets a few murmurs from the audience. Doja's eyes narrow slightly, not in anger but in focus. She says, respectfully, that being younger doesn't mean being naive, and that she's very aware of how the game works, which is why she's choosing to challenge it. Her voice stays even, but the tension is unmistakable. Whoopi lets out a small chuckle, trying to ease things, saying this is why live TV is interesting. The audience laughs, grateful for the release, but the underlying tension doesn't disappear. Doja leans forward now, elbows resting lightly on her knees. She says she came on the show to talk about her work, her growth, and yes, the challenges of being visible. But she's not going to sit quietly while someone implies she deserves backlash for being herself. There's a ripple of applause, louder this time. Joy opens her mouth to respond, then closes it, then tries again. She says she hears Doja, that maybe she could have phrased it differently. It's not quite an apology, but it's a step back. Whoopi nods, saying that's fair, that words matter. She looks at Doja and thanks her for being honest, for speaking her mind. Doja nods back, the edge in her expression softening just a little. The camera cuts briefly to the audience, some people nodding, others whispering to each other. When it comes back, the mood is still charged but controlled. Everyone knows something real just happened, and it's far from over. And as the conversation continues, you can feel that this moment, this simple, firm "don't do that," has shifted the direction of the entire segment, setting the stage for a much deeper clash still to come. The energy doesn't fully reset after that moment. Even as Whoopi tries to steer things back into safer territory, there's a hum in the room, like everyone's aware they're walking on glass now. Whoopi thanks Doja again for clarifying her point and pivots to the music, asking about how her latest work reflects where she is emotionally right now. Doja straightens a bit, takes the opening, and starts talking about growth, about learning when to speak and when to protect her peace. Her voice is calmer again, but there's still a firmness underneath it. She says her recent music comes from a place of being tired of explaining herself, tired of translating her personality into something more palatable. The audience listens closely, quieter now, the clapping more restrained but still supportive. Sarah nods along, clearly engaged, and Sunny watches Doja carefully, like she's following every word. Joy, though, shifts in her seat. She looks down at her notes, then back up, lips pressed together. When Doja finishes her thought, there's a small pause. Whoopi starts to respond, but Joy jumps in just before she can. Joy says she gets the idea of artistic freedom. She really does, but she wonders if Doja ever worries about alienating people who might otherwise support her. She phrases it as a question, but the implication hangs in the air. A few audience members murmur again. Doja doesn't answer right away. She looks at Joy, then briefly out toward the audience, then back. She says she's thought about that a lot, probably more than people realize. She says at some point, though, she had to decide whether she wanted support based on a version of herself that wasn't real. She shrugs slightly and says that kind of support doesn't feel like support at all. Sunny jumps in, agreeing, saying authenticity is often punished at first but respected in the long run. Sarah adds that audiences are more complex than we give them credit for, that people can handle artists evolving. Joy listens, but she doesn't look convinced. She says she's not talking about authenticity, she's talking about responsibility. She says when you have a platform as big as Doja's, words carry weight, and sometimes that weight lands on fans in unexpected ways. That's when Doja's expression tightens again. She tilts her head slightly and asks Joy what she means by that. Her tone isn't confrontational, but it's direct. Joy explains that some fans feel hurt or dismissed when Doja pushes back online, when she says she doesn't owe them anything. Joy says fans invest emotionally, and being told they're not entitled to anything can feel harsh. There's a ripple of reaction in the audience, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Doja exhales through her nose, a quick breath that suggests frustration she's holding back. She says she's never said fans don't matter. She says what she's said is that fans aren't entitled to control her body, her thoughts. She emphasizes the difference, her voice slightly louder now, more animated. Whoopi nods, saying that distinction matters. Sunny adds that parasocial relationships can blur boundaries, and it's healthy for artists to set limits. Joy interrupts again, saying she understands boundaries, but sometimes the way those boundaries are communicated can come off as dismissive. She gestures with her hand, as if smoothing something over, and says that's all she's pointing out. Doja leans back, crossing her arms loosely, not defensive but protective. She says tone is subjective, and often people hear what they expect to hear. She says when a woman sets boundaries firmly, it's labeled as rude, whereas if a man did the same, it might be called confident. The audience applauds louder this time. Someone whistles. Whoopi smiles and says, "Well, that's true." Joy opens her mouth to respond, but Sunny jumps in first, saying this conversation highlights a generational gap in how fame works now versus decades ago. She says social media has changed the rules and expectations haven't caught up. Joy bristles slightly at the word generational. She says this isn't about age, it's about experience. She says she's seen careers rise and fall, and she's offering perspective, not judgment. Doja's eyes flicker briefly, and she uncrosses her arms, leaning forward again. She says she respects experience, but experience doesn't automatically mean someone understands her reality. She says the industry she's navigating isn't the same one that existed 20 or 30 years ago. There's a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the audience. Whoopi shifts in her chair, sensing the tension climbing again. Joy responds quickly, saying challenges are challenges, no matter the era. She says criticism, scrutiny, and backlash have always existed. She adds that learning how to handle them is part of longevity. Doja nods slowly, then says, "Handling something doesn't mean accepting it as right." Her voice is steady, but the emphasis is clear. She says she can handle criticism and still call out unfair framing when she sees it. Sarah interjects, saying she thinks both points can be true, that there's value in resilience and in pushing for change. She smiles, trying to soften the edges. But Joy looks directly at Doja now and asks, "So when someone like me points out how your actions might be perceived, you see that as unfair framing?" Doja meets her gaze without hesitation. She says when it's framed as cause and effect, like she deserves negative treatment because of who she is, that's unfair. She says discussion is fine, critique is fine, but blame disguised as realism isn't. The audience reacts audibly, a mix of applause and murmurs. Whoopi raises her hand slightly, laughing nervously, saying, Okay, we're getting deep here." Joy leans back, crosses her legs, and says she's not blaming, she's observing. She says maybe the issue is sensitivity, that everyone's on edge these days. That comment lands heavy. Doja's lips press together, and she pauses longer this time before responding. When she does, her voice is quieter but more intense. She says calling it sensitivity is another way of dismissing valid reactions. She says people aren't more sensitive, they're just less willing to be talked over. The audience erupts into applause, louder than before. Whoopi lets it go on for a second, then tries to regain control, saying she loves passionate conversations, but wants to make sure everyone's heard. Joy gives a small, tight smile and says she hears Doja. She says maybe they're just coming from different places. It's a concession, but a limited one. Doja nods, acknowledging that. She says differences are fine. She says she just wants those differences to be respected, not reduced to stereotypes about age, attitude, or ego. Sunny looks at Whoopi and says this is why these conversations matter, because they reflect bigger cultural shifts. Whoopi agrees, saying this is real talk, even if it's uncomfortable. The camera cuts again to the audience, faces animated, some whispering, some clapping. When it returns, Doja and Joy are both sitting back now, the immediate heat slightly cooled, but the tension's still very much alive. And as Whoopi tries to transition to the next topic, it's clear this exchange isn't done. Not really. Something's been cracked open, and the rest of the show is going to feel it. Whoopi clears her throat and tries to steer the conversation forward, mentioning a clip from Doja's latest performance that's been circulating online. The screen behind them lights up briefly, the audience claps out of habit, and for a moment it feels like the show might slip back into its usual rhythm. Doja watches the screen, nodding along, offering a small smile when the clip ends. She thanks the audience for the support, says performing live has always been her way of reconnecting when things get loud online. Sarah asks about touring, about how it feels to be back in front of fans after such intense public conversations. Doja answers thoughtfully, saying the stage feels honest to her, that it's one of the few places where she doesn't feel misunderstood. The audience responds warmly, clapping again, some people shouting encouragement. Joy listens, arms resting on the table now, expression neutral but alert. When there's a pause, she leans in again, her voice softer this time, almost reflective. She says she wants to ask something, and Whoopi nods cautiously, giving her the floor. Joy says that watching Doja talk about misunderstanding makes her wonder if there's ever a moment where Doja thinks, maybe I could say less, pull back a bit, make life easier for myself. She frames it as concern, not critique, but the question still carries weight. Doja tilts her head, considering it. She says of course she's thought about it. She says everyone thinks about self-censorship at some point, especially when the consequences are loud and public. But then she adds that every time she's tried to shrink herself to avoid backlash, it's cost her something internally. She gestures toward her chest, saying that kind of compromise adds up. Sunny nods slowly, saying that resonates, especially for women of color in public spaces. The audience murmurs in agreement. Joy responds, saying she understands that internal cost, but she wonders about the external one too. She says constant conflict can wear people down, and she asks whether it's worth it. That's when Doja's tone shifts again, not sharper, but more resolute. She says peace that requires silence isn't really peace. She says conflict isn't her goal, but honesty is. She looks directly at Joy and says she doesn't wake up trying to fight with anyone. She just refuses to pretend she's something she's not. There's applause, sustained this time. Whoopi smiles, nodding, clearly appreciating the honesty, even if the tension remains. Joy lets the applause die down, then says she worries sometimes that this era rewards confrontation more than conversation. She says outrage travels faster than nuance, and she asks whether Doja thinks that dynamic pressures her to be more extreme than she might otherwise be. Doja raises her eyebrows slightly and says she thinks that's an interesting assumption. She says the idea that she's being extreme just by setting boundaries says more about the environment than about her. She adds that she's not trying to go viral, she's trying to stay sane. The audience laughs lightly at that, a mix of humor and recognition. Sarah jumps in, saying social media often flattens people into caricatures, and it's unfair to expect perfection from anyone. Sunny adds that women are often punished for emotional honesty, labeled difficult or dramatic. Joy listens, then says she doesn't disagree with any of that. She says her concern comes from watching people get chewed up by the machine. She gestures broadly, referring to the industry, the internet, the constant cycle. She says she's seen it happen too many times. Doja's expression softens just a bit. She says she appreciates concern, genuinely. She says she knows Joy's not coming from a malicious place. But then she adds that concern can still feel like control when it assumes someone doesn't know what they're doing. Her voice stays calm, but the point lands firmly. Whoopi interjects, saying that's a fair distinction. She says there's a line between advice and projection, and sometimes it's hard to see where it is. Joy exhales, nodding. She says maybe she's guilty of that sometimes. It's one of the more vulnerable moments from her, and the audience reacts with a softer kind of applause. But then Joy adds, almost as an afterthought, that part of being in the public eye is accepting that everyone will have an opinion, including people at this table. She smiles slightly, as if to soften the edge. Doja smiles back, but it doesn't quite reach her eyes. She says opinions are fine. She says what she pushes back on is being told how she should respond to those opinions. She says there's a difference between listening and obeying. The audience reacts audibly again, clapping, a few cheers. Whoopi chuckles and says, she's got a point. Sunny looks at Joy and asks whether she feels heard right now. Joy pauses, then says she does, even if she doesn't agree with everything. She says disagreement doesn't mean disrespect. Doja nods, saying she agrees with that. She says she doesn't need everyone to agree with her. She just needs the space to speak without being framed as the problem. There's a brief silence after that, not awkward, but heavy. You can feel the weight of the exchange settling in. The audience is quieter now, listening closely. Whoopi takes that moment to zoom out, saying this conversation reflects a larger cultural shift about who gets to define narratives. She says shows like this are supposed to wrestle with those questions, even when it gets uncomfortable. Joy adds that discomfort isn't always bad, that it can be productive. She looks at Doja and says she respects her willingness to sit in it. Doja thanks her for saying that. She says these conversations matter, even when they're tense, because they're happening everywhere, not just on this couch. She gestures toward the audience, toward the camera, implying beyond the studio. Sarah smiles and says she thinks viewers at home are probably feeling very seen right now. The audience laughs and applauds again. As the segment winds down, Whoopi mentions they're going to take a quick break. She thanks Doja for being open and honest, and thanks the panel for keeping it real. The applause swells as the camera pulls back slightly. But even as the music starts to cue, you can see Joy lean toward Doja and say something off mic. Doja nods once, her expression unreadable. The tension hasn't exploded, but it hasn't disappeared either. When they come back from break, everyone knows the rest of the show is going to be colored by what's already been said. The audience is buzzing, whispering to each other, phones already out, fingers typing. Whatever was supposed to happen next, this exchange has become the moment people will be talking about. And it's clear the final stretch of the show is going to deal with the fallout, whether anyone planned for it or not. When the show comes back from commercial, the energy in the studio is noticeably different. It's not explosive, but it's charged, like everyone's aware they're standing in the wake of something real. The applause is a little louder than usual, a little longer, and when it fades, there's an undercurrent of anticipation. Whoopi smiles, but there's a seriousness behind it now. She thanks everyone for sticking with them and says that conversations like the one they just had are why the show exists in the first place. She looks directly at Doja and says she appreciates her honesty and her willingness to sit in discomfort on live television. Doja nods, her posture relaxed but alert, hands resting in her lap. Joy clears her throat. There's a brief pause where it's not clear if she's going to speak, but then she does. She says she wants to say something before they move on. The audience quiets immediately. Joy says she knows these conversations can come off as confrontational, especially on TV, but she wants to be clear that her intention was never to dismiss Doja's experience. She says she's passionate, sometimes blunt, and that can land harder than she means it to. She looks at Doja and says, "I don't always get it right." It's not a full apology, but it's closer than before. The audience responds with a mix of applause and murmurs. Doja takes a breath before responding. She says she appreciates Joy saying that. She says she didn't come on the show expecting everyone to agree with her, but she did expect a real conversation. She adds that disagreement doesn't scare her, being misrepresented does. Her tone is calm, grounded. Whoopi nods, saying that's fair. Sunny adds that this exchange is exactly what healthy debate looks like, even when it's uncomfortable. Sarah agrees, saying it's refreshing to see people talk through differences instead of talking past each other. The tension eases just enough for everyone to breathe again. There's a sense of resolution, not because everything's been settled, but because the honesty is out in the open. Whoopi transitions to a lighter topic, briefly mentioning Doja's upcoming projects. But even that conversation carries the weight of what just happened. Doja answers politely, warmly, but the audience knows this isn't what they'll remember most. As the show moves toward its closing moments, Whoopi thanks Doja again for being there. The audience stands for a brief ovation as the credits begin to roll. Some people are clapping enthusiastically, others are talking animatedly to the person next to them. A few shake their heads, processing it all. When the cameras officially stop rolling, the energy doesn't immediately dissipate. You can see panelists leaning toward each other, exchanging quiet words. Doja stands, adjusts her jacket, and thanks Whoopi off mic. Joy approaches her, says something quietly. Doja listens, nods once, and responds softly. It's not performative, not for the cameras. Just two people acknowledging a tense moment. Backstage, staff members buzz around, some whispering, some checking their phones. Producers already know this segment is going to light up online. One of them tells another, that's going everywhere. And it does. Within minutes of the episode airing on the East Coast, clips start circulating. The moment where Doja says, "Don't do that," is already being reposted across platforms. Some captions praise her for setting boundaries. Others accuse her of being disrespectful. The comment sections fill up fast. On X, one clip racks up hundreds of thousands of views in under an hour. Hashtags start trending with Doja's name and the show's. Fans applaud her composure, calling her articulate, grounded, and brave. Others side with Joy, saying she was just asking questions and that Doja overreacted. TikTok stitches pop up almost immediately. One creator pauses the clip and says, "This is what it looks like when a woman refuses to be talked over." Another shakes their head and says, "You go on a talk show, expect tough questions." The debate spills out far beyond the original conversation. Instagram fills with reaction videos. Celebrities weigh in subtly, liking posts, dropping cryptic comments about boundaries and respect. Media outlets start pushing headlines within the hour. framing the moment in different ways depending on the angle they want to take. The next morning, entertainment news shows are replaying the clip on loop. Some call it tense but necessary. Others label it a clash, a confrontation. Panel discussions break out about generational divides, media responsibility, and the way women are expected to behave in public spaces. Joy addresses it briefly on a radio appearance later that week. She says she stands by asking hard questions, but acknowledges that conversations evolve and that it's important to listen as much as you speak. She doesn't sound defensive, but she doesn't fully retreat either. Doja, for her part, doesn't post immediately. When she does finally say something, it's measured. She shares a short message thanking people who watched the show and supported open dialogue. She says conversations don't have to be comfortable to be meaningful. She doesn't mention Joy by name. Fans dissect every word. Behind the scenes, sources say the show's producers were both nervous and thrilled. Nervous about backlash, thrilled about engagement. Ratings spike for the episode. The clip becomes one of the most watched segments of the season. Audience members who were in the studio start posting their own accounts. One says the tension was palpable, that you could hear a pin drop when Doja spoke up. Another says it felt empowering to watch someone push back respectfully on live TV. Days later, the moment is still being talked about. Articles analyze body language, tone, phrasing. Commentators argue about whether it was a snap or a boundary, a clash or a conversation. But what's clear is this: it didn't fade quietly. For Doja, the moment becomes part of a larger narrative about control, voice, and self-definition. For the show, it's a reminder of why live television still matters, because you can't script moments like that. And for viewers, it sparks conversations in living rooms, group chats, and comment sections everywhere. People debate where they stand, who they agree with, and why the exchange hit such a nerve. In the end, there's no neat conclusion, no unanimous takeaway. Just a moment that felt real, uncomfortable, and honest. And now we want to hear from you. What did you think about Doja Cat's response? Was she right to push back, or did the conversation go too far? Share your opinion in the comments. And make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories and moments that everyone's talking about.